The bullet passed so close to his skull that he felt the heat on his ear before he heard the crack. Private First Class. Michael Donovan pressed his face into the frozen rubble, his heart hammering against the shattered concrete beneath him. Somewhere in the skeletal remains of what had once been a French apartment building, a German marksman was cycling another round. But here was the problem. Donovan had been looking through his scope. He had been aimed at the exact position where the muzzle flash should have been, and yet he had seen nothing. Nothing at all. The shot had come from somewhere else entirely, 40 meters to the left, maybe more. A second shooter, a ghost he never knew existed. And now, as he lay there in the freezing November air, his breath forming tiny clouds that could betray his position, Donovan understood something terrible. The Germans had turned the very act of aiming into a death sentence. If you are watching this and have not yet subscribed, take a moment now to hit that button and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. Your support keeps these stories alive. This was Metz, France, November 1944. The ancient fortress city had stood for over 2,000 years, surviving Roman legions, medieval sieges, and the First World War. But what the Germans had transformed it into now was something far more sinister than any castle or battlement. They had turned the city into a precision killing machine, a labyrinth of stone and shadow where American snipers went to die. The Wehrmacht had garrisoned the city with veteran troops who understood urban warfare in ways the Americans were only beginning to learn. Every window could hide a gun barrel. Every rooftop could conceal a spotter. Every rubble pile could become a firing position. But the most dangerous threat was not what the Americans could see. It was what they could not see. The German sniper doctrine in late 1944 had evolved through years of brutal combat on the Eastern Front. Fighting the Soviets in the ruins of Stalingrad and across the Ukrainian steppes, Wehrmacht marksmen had perfected techniques that made them among the deadliest precision shooters in the world. They moved in pairs. They communicated through subtle signals. And they had developed something that American intelligence had no name for, no counter to, and no defense against. The soldiers called it Doppelstellung, the double position. The concept was elegant in its brutality. Two German snipers would occupy separate concealed positions, typically 30 to 50 meters apart, both covering the same sector. The first sniper was the bait. His job was simple: draw attention. He might fire a shot, intentionally missing. He might shift just enough to create movement that would catch the eye of an American marksman scanning for targets. And the moment that American brought his rifle up, the moment he pressed his eye to his scope to identify and engage, the second German would fire, not at the first sniper, at the American. The geometry was perfect. The American would be focused forward, his entire field of vision narrowed to a small circle of magnified glass. His peripheral awareness would shrink to almost nothing, and from an angle he could not possibly see, while looking through his optics, the killing shot would come. Donovan had watched this happen. 4 times in 2 weeks he had been present when fellow American snipers had been eliminated by the double position tactic. Sergeant Raymond Wilkes had been the first. A good man from Ohio who had been an accountant before the war. He had identified what he thought was a German marksman in a window 300 meters away. He had taken his time, steadied his breathing, pressed his cheek to the stock, and settled his eye against the rubber of his scope. He never finished the exhale. The bullet that caught him in the temple came from a completely different building, at a 90-degree angle to his line of sight. He was gone before his body hit the ground. Then came Corporal Martinez, then Private Harrison, then Sergeant Thomas Bell, a veteran of North Africa who had killed 11 confirmed German soldiers and thought he understood the game. Bell had been cautious. He had checked his flanks before setting up. He had looked around before raising his rifle. But looking around was not the same as maintaining continuous 360-degree awareness, and the moment his eye went to the glass, he became blind to everything outside that narrow cone of vision. The Doppelstellung consumed him like it had consumed the others. By early November, American sniper losses in the Met sector had reached catastrophic levels. The ratios that intelligence officers compiled were devastating. For every German sniper the Americans eliminated, 2 American marksmen died. And the psychological toll was even worse than the statistical one. Men who had been confident, aggressive, willing to take positions and engage targets, now hesitated. They second-guessed themselves. They saw enemies in every shadow and death in every window. Some requested transfers. Others simply stopped volunteering for forward positions. The Germans were not just killing American snipers. They were destroying American sniper morale. Donovan lay in the rubble for 47 minutes after that near miss. He did not raise his head. He did not try to identify the shooter. He simply breathed, and he thought. His rifle was beside him, a standard M1903A4 with a Weaver 330 scope, the same weapon carried by every American sniper in the European theater. It was a good rifle, accurate, reliable, but it had a fatal flaw, and that flaw was the very thing that made it effective: the scope. The Weaver 330 was a 2.5 power optic, giving the shooter magnification that allowed precise shot placement at ranges where iron sights would be useless, but that magnification came at a cost. When you looked through the scope, your eye was pressed close to the rubber cup, blocking out all peripheral light. Your field of view narrowed to about 6 degrees. Everything outside that narrow cone, the other 354 degrees of the world, ceased to exist. You were effectively blind to anything not directly in front of your barrel. And in urban combat, where threats could come from any angle at any moment, that blindness was lethal. Donovan understood this now with crystalline clarity. The problem was not the German snipers. The problem was not even the Doppelstellung tactic. The problem was that every American sniper, the moment he tried to do his job, voluntarily gave up the one thing that might save his life: awareness of his surroundings. And as long as that remained true, the Germans would keep winning. That evening, back at the temporary barracks established in a partially intact warehouse, Donovan sat on his cot and stared at his rifle. Around him, other soldiers were writing letters, cleaning weapons, trying to sleep. The war continued its endless grind outside these walls. Artillery rumbling in the distance like approaching thunder, the occasional crack of rifle fire reminding everyone that death was never more than a few hundred meters away. But Donovan was not listening to the war. He was thinking about geometry, about angles, about the fundamental physics of vision and concealment. He reached into his pack and pulled out his shaving kit. Inside was a standard military-issue mirror, roughly 4 inches by 6 inches, the same mirror carried by millions of American soldiers for the mundane task of shaving in the field. It was not special. It was not tactical. It had no military application that anyone had ever considered. But as Donovan held it up, angling it to catch the dim light of the kerosene lamp, he saw something in its reflection that changed everything. The mirror showed him what was behind him without turning around. That was it. That was the entire revelation. A child could have figured it out. Humans had been using mirrors for thousands of years. The principle was so simple, it barely qualified as an idea. But in that moment, sitting on a cot in a cold warehouse in eastern France, Donovan saw the solution to the Doppelstellung problem. If the issue was that looking through a scope eliminated peripheral vision, then the answer was to restore that peripheral vision through reflection. Mount a mirror to the rifle at the correct angle, and a sniper could keep his eye on the scope while simultaneously monitoring his flanks and rear. The German tactic depended on the American being completely focused forward. Take away that dependence, and the tactic collapsed. Donovan worked through the night. His first attempts were crude, holding the mirror in different positions while lying prone, trying to find an angle that would give him useful visibility without interfering with his sight picture or his cheek welled against the stock. The geometry was tricky. The mirror had to be positioned high enough to clear his head, angled correctly to reflect the area behind and to the sides, and stable enough to stay in position during the recoil of a shot. He experimented with different mounting points. He tried wedging the mirror into the sling swivel. He considered cutting the mirror down to a smaller size. He wrapped medical tape around his fingers, trying different configurations in the darkness. By dawn, he had a prototype. The mirror was secured to the left side of his rifle stock with several wraps of surgical tape, positioned at roughly a 45-degree angle to reflect the area behind his left shoulder. It was not elegant. It looked, frankly, ridiculous. A combat rifle with a shaving mirror sticking off the side like some kind of absurdist art project. But when Donovan settled into a prone position and pressed his eye to the scope, he could see something extraordinary. He could see forward through the optic, and simultaneously, with a slight shift of focus, he could see a reflected image of what was behind him in the mirror. The effect was disorienting at first. His brain struggled to process two separate visual inputs, the magnified forward view and the reversed reflected rear view. But after 10 minutes of practice, something clicked. The two images began to integrate in his mind, forming a kind of expanded situational awareness that he had never experienced before. He was no longer blind when he looked through the scope. He could see in two directions at once. The next morning, Donovan reported for patrol with his modified rifle. His squad leader, Staff Sergeant Patrick O'Brien, took one look at the contraption and told him to remove it. Donovan refused. The argument that followed brought in Lieutenant Davis, the platoon commander, who looked at the mirror-equipped rifle with an expression that mixed bewilderment with irritation. Unauthorized modifications to military equipment were prohibited. The regulation was clear. The punishment could range from loss of pay to court-martial in extreme cases. Whatever Donovan thought he was doing, it was not sanctioned, not approved, and not acceptable. Donovan asked for one chance. Just one. He asked to demonstrate his concept in a controlled environment before any decision was made. He told the lieutenant about the Doppelstellung tactic, about the deaths of Wilkes and Martinez and Harrison and Bell. He explained the mathematics of the scope's field of view, the geometry of blind spots, the physics of why American snipers kept dying. And he showed them the mirror, explaining how it restored peripheral awareness without compromising forward accuracy. Lieutenant Davis listened. He did not smile. But he also did not order the mirror removed. Not yet. He told Donovan to report back in 24 hours, either with proof that his idea worked or without the mirror. 24 hours, one day to prove that a $4 shaving mirror could break a German tactic that had killed dozens of American marksmen. The ruins where Donovan set up that afternoon had been a textile factory before the war. Now it was a skeleton of steel and concrete, its walls perforated by artillery, its floors littered with debris. German positions were known to exist in a row of buildings 300 meters to the east across an open square that had once been a marketplace. This was exactly the kind of environment where Doppelstellung thrived. Multiple sight lines, multiple concealment options, multiple angles of fire. If the Germans had shooters in those buildings, they almost certainly had them arranged for mutual support. Donovan positioned himself in a second-floor window behind a collapsed section of wall that provided both cover and concealment. He arranged his rifle carefully, using a sandbag he had carried to stabilize his position. Then he settled into his scope and began scanning the distant buildings. The mirror was in his peripheral vision, a small bright rectangle showing him the ruined interior of the factory behind him. He could see the doorway he had entered through. He could see a section of collapsed ceiling that could hide a threat. He could see shadows and light and the subtle movements of dust motes in the air. For 20 minutes, nothing happened. The German positions were silent. The square was empty. The only sound was the distant rumble of artillery and the occasional crack of small arms fire from other sectors of the city. Donovan's eye began to tire from the strain of maintaining dual focus. His body grew stiff in the prone position. The cold seeped through his uniform, numbing his fingers against the metal of his rifle. Then he saw it, in the mirror. Movement, subtle, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable. Someone was inside the factory, moving through the shadows on the ground floor, approximately 30 meters behind Donovan's position. The figure was careful, professional, advancing from cover to cover with the practiced discipline of a trained soldier. And he was carrying a rifle with a scope, a German sniper, flanking Donovan from behind while his attention was supposed to be focused forward. Donovan's heart rate spiked, but he did not move. He kept his eye pressed to the scope, maintaining the illusion that he was unaware of the threat behind him. In his peripheral vision, he tracked the German's progress through the mirror. The man was good. He moved when the distant artillery masked any sound. He paused in the deepest shadows. He was 50 meters away, then 40, then 30. He was positioning for a shot. In perhaps 15 seconds, he would have a clear angle on Donovan's back, and the American would die just like Wilkes and Martinez and all the others. Except Donovan could see him. In a single fluid motion, Donovan rolled to his right, bringing his rifle around as he moved. The German, still believing he was undetected, had just begun to raise his weapon when Donovan's round caught him in the upper chest. The enemy sniper fell backward into the rubble, his rifle clattering against the concrete floor. The sound echoed through the ruined factory like a declaration of war, but Donovan was already moving again, because he understood that where there was one German sniper, there was likely another. That was the whole point of Doppelstellung. And sure enough, as he rolled to a new position behind a fallen beam, his mirror caught movement in the opposite direction. A second German, this one positioned near a collapsed stairwell to Donovan's left, had risen slightly at the sound of the shot, trying to identify what had happened to his partner. He was exposed for perhaps 2 seconds. Donovan put a round through his throat. 2 German snipers, both dead, both caught by a technique they had never encountered and could not have anticipated. The mirror that Lieutenant Davis had considered confiscating had just saved Donovan's life and eliminated 2 enemies in the span of 8 seconds. But it was what happened next that transformed this engagement from a successful fight into a legend. As Donovan scanned the area through his scope, checking for additional threats, his mirror showed him something else. A third figure, this one on the upper floor of a building across the square, adjusting position behind a window frame. The distant German had apparently been overwatch for the 2-man team in the factory, perhaps a commander or a senior marksman coordinating the Doppelstellung from a position of relative safety. He had just watched both his subordinates die in rapid succession, and now he was doing something stupid. He was leaning forward to get a better view of the American who had just destroyed his team. Donovan swung his rifle toward the distant building, 320 meters, wind minimal, target partially exposed behind inadequate cover. The German had made the same mistake that had killed so many Americans. He had focused so intently on looking at Donovan that he had forgotten about being seen himself. The muzzle flash reflected in the glass that still clung to the window frame gave Donovan his final confirmation. He squeezed the trigger. The distant figure slumped forward and did not move again. 3 German snipers, 3 confirmed kills, 1 engagement, 0 American casualties, and a shaving mirror that had made all the difference. Word of Donovan's success spread through the American sniper community with remarkable speed. By nightfall, every marksman in the battalion had heard some version of the story. By the following morning, 3 other snipers had requested permission to copy Donovan's modification. Lieutenant Davis, presented with undeniable evidence of the mirror's effectiveness, chose not to enforce the regulation against unauthorized modifications. He looked the other way as more and more mirrors appeared on more and more rifles. The official position was that the modification did not exist. The practical reality was that it was becoming standard equipment. If you are learning something new about the incredible innovations of World War II, consider sharing this video with someone who would appreciate it. And leave a comment below with your thoughts on Donovan's improvised solution. The technique that emerged over the following weeks was more sophisticated than Donovan's initial prototype. Snipers experimented with different mirror sizes, finding that smaller mirrors of roughly 2 inches by 3 inches provided sufficient visibility while being less conspicuous. They tried different mounting positions, discovering that the optimal angle varied depending on the individual shooter's dominant eye and preferred cheek weld. Some used medical tape, others fabricated small brackets from scrap metal. A few particularly ingenious soldiers developed systems using multiple mirrors, creating overlapping fields of reflected vision that covered nearly 360 degrees around their position. The tactical implications were profound. The entire German Doppelstellung system depended on the assumption that an American sniper, once engaged with his scope, would be blind to flanking threats. Remove that assumption, and the tactic not only failed, but became actively dangerous to the Germans. A 2-man German sniper team attempting a double position attack against a mirror-equipped American would find their flanking element detected and engaged before they could execute their plan. Instead of the hunter, the second German sniper became the prey. German casualties among sniper teams operating in the Metz sector began to climb dramatically. Where the kill ratio had previously favored the Wehrmacht at roughly 2 American deaths for every German, the numbers began to reverse. By mid-November, American snipers using the mirror modification were achieving 4-to-1 success rates, 4 German marksmen eliminated for every American lost. The tactical advantage had shifted completely. German intelligence took notice. Intercepted communications from Wehrmacht units in the Metz sector mentioned a new American optical device that was defeating established sniper doctrine. The Germans did not understand exactly what the Americans were doing. References to the technique were vague and confused, but they understood the results. Their best marksmen were being eliminated. Their most reliable tactics were failing. Something had changed in the geometry of urban sniper warfare, and they could not adapt quickly enough to compensate. The Wehrmacht attempted various countermeasures. German sniper teams tried repositioning more frequently, hoping that rapid movement would prevent the Americans from spotting their flanking elements. It did not work. The mirror-equipped snipers could detect movement in their peripheral reflection regardless of where the Germans positioned. Other German teams tried simultaneous attacks, with both elements of a Doppelstellung pair firing at the same moment, eliminating the delay that had allowed Donovan to engage them one at a time. This approach achieved occasional success, but it required precise coordination that was difficult to maintain under combat conditions, and it still gave the American a warning if his mirror caught either German preparing to fire. Some German marksmen reportedly tried using their own mirrors, hoping to copy the American technique. But the Doppelstellung depended on the Americans being blind, while the Germans maintained awareness. If both sides had equal peripheral vision, the German tactic lost its fundamental advantage. The mirror modification did not just counter Doppelstellung, it rendered the entire concept obsolete. By late November 1944, the mirror technique had spread beyond the units directly engaged in the Metz fighting. Soldiers transferring from the Metz sector to other fronts carried the modification with them, teaching it to snipers in new divisions. A technical inspector visiting the front in December noticed the mirrors and filed a report that circulated through Army Command for weeks. Officers debated how to handle the situation. On one hand, the modification violated regulations prohibiting unauthorized changes to precision equipment. On the other hand, it was clearly saving American lives. The debate continued without resolution while the technique continued to spread. The story of the mirror modification reached higher echelons of military command in early 1945. Some generals wanted to formalize the technique, issuing standardized mirror attachments and official training protocols. Others worried about the precedent of sanctioning unauthorized field modifications, fearing it would undermine equipment discipline throughout the Army. The bureaucratic discussion continued for months while the war itself moved toward its conclusion. By the time any official decision might have been reached, the fighting in Europe was over. Historians who later studied the mirror modification estimated that it saved between 40 and 60 American sniper lives between November 1944 and May 1945. The exact number is impossible to determine. Many snipers using the technique were never formally documented. Many engagements where the mirror made the difference were never reported in detail. The evidence exists primarily in after-action reports, personal diaries, and the memories of surviving veterans who remember a strange period when soldiers began taping shaving mirrors to their rifles. But the significance of Donovan's innovation extends beyond the immediate tactical success. What he demonstrated in the ruins of Metz was something that military history has seen repeatedly. When established doctrine fails, when the enemy develops techniques that existing training cannot counter, it is often the individual soldier, the person actually experiencing combat, who finds the solution. The generals and the planners and the intelligence officers had no answer to Doppelstellung. They did not understand it. They could not counter it. They just watched the casualty reports accumulate and hoped the situation would somehow improve. It was a 22-year-old private with a shaving mirror who broke the German system. The roots of this kind of improvised innovation in sniper warfare stretch back to the First World War, when another young soldier faced a similar problem and found a similar solution. In 1915, on the rocky shores of Gallipoli, an Australian named William Beach watched his fellow soldiers die from Turkish sniper fire. The trenches at Gallipoli were often separated by less than 50 meters. Any man who raised his head above the parapet was immediately exposed to enemy marksmen who had memorized every angle, every firing lane, every point where a careless soldier might present a target. The casualties were horrific. Men were being shot through the head while trying to observe the enemy, while eating their rations, while simply existing in the wrong place at the wrong moment. Beach was a builder's foreman in civilian life, a practical man who understood materials and construction. He looked at the problem with a craftsman's eye and saw the same fundamental issue that Donovan would identify nearly 30 years later. The act of observation exposed the observer to danger. To see the enemy required raising your head, which meant presenting a target. The geometry was lethal. His solution was different from Donovan's, adapted to the different circumstances of trench warfare, but it addressed the same principle. Beach took a biscuit box, some signal wire, and a broken mirror. He cut the stock of a Lee Enfield rifle in half and reconnected the two pieces with a wooden frame. The mirror was positioned to serve as a periscope, allowing the shooter to see the rifle sights while keeping his head below the level of the parapet. A string attached to the trigger allowed the rifle to be fired without the soldier ever exposing himself to enemy view. The periscope rifle was born. Like Donovan's mirror, Beach's invention spread rapidly through the Australian and New Zealand forces. Soldiers copied his design, made improvements, adapted it to different rifles and different conditions. Within weeks, periscope rifles were in use throughout the Anzac positions at Gallipoli. The Turkish snipers, who had grown accustomed to easy targets presenting themselves above the trenches, found their prey had suddenly become invisible. Australian marksmen could now take aimed shots while remaining completely protected from return fire. The kill ratio shifted dramatically in favor of the Anzacs. The British military eventually recognized Beach's contribution. In 1921, the War Office paid him £100 for his wartime invention, an acknowledgment that his improvised solution had saved countless lives. His name appears in military histories, his invention is displayed in museums, and his innovation is studied by scholars examining the evolution of sniper technology. He achieved something that most soldiers never accomplish. He changed the way wars are fought. What connects Beech and Donovan across 30 years of military history is not just the use of mirrors. It is the recognition that technology, even simple technology, can transform the mathematics of combat. Both men understood that warfare is ultimately about geometry, about angles and sight lines, and the relationship between concealment and exposure. Both men found ways to alter that geometry in favor of their side, and both men did so through improvisation, using materials at hand, violating regulations, operating outside official channels. The military implications of their innovations extended far beyond their immediate circumstances. The principles that Beech demonstrated at Gallipoli influenced the development of periscope technology throughout the First World War. The Cameron Yagi periscope rifle, developed in the United States, was a direct descendant of Beech's original concept, refined and improved through engineering, but fundamentally based on the same insight that a man lying in a protected position could aim and fire without exposing himself. Specialized reconnaissance units adopted periscope technology for observation posts. Tank designers incorporated similar principles into their vehicles, allowing crews to view their surroundings without opening hatches. Donovan's mirror technique followed a similar trajectory. Though it never achieved the formal recognition that Beech's invention received, the principles he demonstrated continued to influence sniper training and scope design for decades. The fundamental insight that a shooter needs peripheral awareness while maintaining magnified forward vision became a consideration in optical equipment development through the Korean War, the Vietnam War, and beyond. Modern rifle scopes often incorporate features designed to address the same problem that Donovan solved with surgical tape and a shaving mirror. The technology has advanced, but the geometry remains the same. The story of the 3 German snipers that Donovan eliminated that November afternoon became something of a legend among American marksmen in the European theater. Different versions of the tale circulated, with details changing slightly from telling to telling. Some versions said there were 4 Germans. Some said Donovan engaged them at even longer range. Some claimed he was surrounded and fought his way out using only the mirror to guide his shots. The specifics varied, but the core truth remained consistent. A soldier had faced an impossible tactical situation, devised an unconventional solution, and prevailed against multiple enemies through a combination of cleverness, courage, and marksmanship. What made the story resonate was not just the tactical achievement. It was the David and Goliath quality of the confrontation. The German Doppelstellung tactic represented the accumulated expertise of years of professional military development. It was the product of combat experience, tactical analysis, and systematic training. It had been refined through thousands of engagements on multiple fronts. It was, in a sense, the best that German military doctrine could produce in the field of sniper employment. And it was defeated by a shaving mirror. That dynamic, the improvised solution beating the institutional one, appears throughout military history, but it is particularly prominent in the story of snipers. Perhaps because sniping is fundamentally an individual skill practiced by lone soldiers or small teams operating far from the support of larger units, it attracts people who think independently and solve problems creatively. The great snipers of history are almost always innovators, men and women who developed new techniques, modified existing equipment, and found advantages that their training never anticipated. Consider Carlos Hathcock, the legendary Marine sniper of the Vietnam War, who once killed an enemy marksman by shooting through his opponent's own rifle scope. The physics of that shot are almost impossible. For Hathcock's bullet to travel through the enemy's scope and strike him in the eye, the enemy had to have been aimed directly at Hathcock at the exact moment Hathcock fired. Their scopes had to be aligned on a near-perfect axis. The probability of such alignment occurring by chance is astronomically small, yet it happened, and it became one of the most famous sniper stories of the 20th century. Hathcock achieved that kill not through institutional training, but through exceptional skill, patience, and the willingness to take a shot that official doctrine would have considered impossible, or consider Simo Häyhä, the Finnish marksman known as the White Death, who eliminated over 500 Soviet soldiers during the Winter War of 1939 to 1940. Häyhä used iron sights rather than telescopic optics, believing that the scope's glint could give away his position. He packed snow in his mouth to prevent his breath from creating visible vapor in the frozen air. He wore entirely white camouflage and positioned himself in snowbanks, becoming invisible against the Finnish landscape. None of these techniques came from official training manuals. They were innovations born from combat experience and individual creativity. The thread connecting these figures, from Beach at Gallipoli to Donovan at Metz to Hathcock in Vietnam to Häyhä in Finland, is the recognition that sniper warfare rewards thinking soldiers. The rifle is just the instrument. The optics are just the technology. What determines success or failure is the mind behind the trigger, the ability to assess situations, identify problems, and develop solutions under conditions where conventional approaches are failing. Donovan's war did not end with the 3 Germans in the factory. He continued serving through the conclusion of the Metz campaign and beyond, fighting through the final months of the European War until German surrender in May 1945. His service record does not list him as one of the highest-scoring American snipers. He never achieved the recognition of figures like Hathcock or Häyhä. After the war, he returned home and lived a quiet civilian life. The mirror modification that had saved his life and changed sniper tactics was never formally acknowledged by the military he served. Yet the significance of what he accomplished should not be measured by official recognition. It should be measured by the lives saved. Every American sniper who used the mirror technique in the final months of the European War owed something to Donovan's innovation. Every German sniper team whose Doppelstellung attack failed because their target could see them coming was another life preserved on the American side. The technique spread from soldier to soldier, team to team, division to division, through the informal networks that exist in every military organization. It became part of the collective knowledge of American snipers in World War II, even if it never appeared in any training manual. The factory where Donovan killed those 3 Germans has long since been demolished. The city of Metz has rebuilt itself, erasing most traces of the destruction that characterized it in 1944. The rubble, where American and German snipers stalked each other through frozen November streets, is now covered by modern buildings, shops, apartments, the ordinary infrastructure of peacetime civilization. Few people walking those streets today know anything about the sniper war that was fought there, about the Doppelstellung tactic, about the young American who broke it with a shaving mirror. But somewhere in museums and private collections, there are still rifles from that era with mirror brackets attached to their stocks. Some have the surgical tape that Donovan used. Others have more sophisticated mounting systems developed by later imitators. Each one represents a moment when an individual soldier chose to violate regulations in order to survive, when improvisation trumped doctrine, when the human capacity for adaptation proved stronger than the institutional resistance to change. That is perhaps the most enduring lesson of Donovan's story. Military organizations, by their nature, resist unauthorized innovation. They have to. Discipline depends on soldiers following orders, using equipment as prescribed, operating within established guidelines. Without that discipline, armies become mobs. But there are moments, crisis points, where existing doctrine fails, when the regulations that normally ensure efficiency become obstacles to survival. In those moments, the soldiers who recognize the failure and develop new solutions are not troublemakers. They are the ones who save their comrades. The Germans had a system that worked. The Americans had none. And the gap between them was killing Americans every day. Into that gap stepped a 22-year-old private with a $4 shaving mirror and an idea that his commanders initially wanted to forbid. He did not wait for official approval. He did not request authorization through proper channels. He saw that his fellow soldiers were dying. He understood why they were dying, and he figured out how to stop it. 3 German snipers exposed and eliminated in a single engagement, because one American refused to accept that the enemy's tactics were unbeatable. They called his mirror trick stupid. They said it violated regulations. They threatened him with punishment. And then they watched it work. They watched it save lives. They watched it spread through the American forces and change the dynamics of sniper warfare in the final months of the European War. Michael Donovan never became famous. His name does not appear in most histories of World War II. The mirror modification he invented is a footnote at best, mentioned occasionally by specialists studying sniper tactics, but unknown to the general public. But history is not made only by famous people. It is made by countless individuals whose innovations, sacrifices, and moments of insight accumulate into the larger story of human conflict. Donovan was one of those individuals. His contribution was small in the vast scale of the war, but enormous in its immediate impact. He saw a problem, found a solution, and had the courage to implement it despite the obstacles. The mirrorscope trick was never about the mirror. It was about seeing what others could not see, about understanding the geometry of combat in ways that official doctrine had missed. It was about recognizing that the Germans had found a vulnerability in American sniper technique and devising a countermeasure that closed that vulnerability. It was about adaptation, about the fundamental human capacity to encounter a problem and solve it, even when the institutional structures around you say the solution is not allowed. That capacity exists in every generation of soldiers. It existed in William Beach at Gallipoli, devising his periscope rifle from a biscuit box and a broken mirror. It existed in Michael Donovan at Metz, taping a shaving mirror to his rifle stock. It exists today in conflicts around the world. Wherever soldiers face situations their training did not anticipate and find solutions their commanders did not authorize. The technology changes, the weapons change, the enemies change, but the fundamental dynamic remains constant. Those who can adapt survive. Those who cannot do not. If this story resonated with you, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell to ensure you do not miss future videos exploring the forgotten innovations and untold stories of military history. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.